What was it like to walk through Jerusalem in 30 AD? You imagine ancient stone, sunlight, the temple gleaming on its hill. But what if that image is missing something? What was the smell? What touched your skin when you brushed past a stranger in a narrow alley? Where did the waste go when 100,000 people relieved themselves each day? How did a mother wash her child when water had to be carried in jars from a distant spring? How did you clean your hands before eating bread kneaded by those same unwashed hands? These are not small questions. They are the questions of survival. Because hygiene was not a convenience in 30 AD Jerusalem. It was not a matter of comfort or preference. It was a daily negotiation with filth, disease, and the limitations of a desert city packed beyond its capacity. No sewers, no soap as you know it, no understanding that invisible organisms were multiplying in every drop of standing water, every shared cup, every surface your hand touched. What you are about to discover is this. The world Jesus walked through was one your body could not endure, not because you are weak, but because you have been shaped by a sanitized world, and the ancient one would break you within days. Water was the first problem, not the lack of it entirely. Jerusalem had cisterns carved into bedrock. It had public pools. It had the Gihon Spring flowing in the Kidron Valley, and the engineering marvel of Hezekiah's tunnel bringing that water inside the city walls. But engineering is not abundance. A city of 100,000 people, swelling to 500,000 during Passover, survived on rationed water drawn from stone reservoirs, carried in clay jars, measured in gallons per family per day. Enough to drink. Enough to cook lentils and thin the wine. Enough to rinse your hands before a meal, if you were observant of the law. Not enough to wash your body. Not enough to clean your clothes properly. Not enough to scrub the cooking pots, rinse the courtyard, or flush away the waste accumulating in the corners of daily life. You took water for granted this morning. You showered. You flushed a toilet. You washed your hands 3, 4, 5 times. Without thinking. In Jerusalem, a family of 8 might share 10 gallons for an entire day. Do the arithmetic. A modern shower uses that much in 2 minutes. So what did people do? They prioritized. Drinking first, cooking second. Ritual washing when the law demanded it. Hands before bread, full immersion after contact with a corpse or menstrual blood. But the body itself? Your skin, your hair, the sweat dried into the folds of your neck. That waited. Days became weeks. Weeks became the norm. You wore the same wool tunic against your skin until the fibers held the salt of your sweat, the oil of your scalp, the dust of the street. You smelled yourself. You smelled everyone, and there was no escape, because the water was not just limited, it was shared. The mikveh baths used for purification were not drained and refilled after each person. Dozens of bodies passed through the same water in a single day. The ritual made you spiritually clean, but the water itself carried what the previous body left behind. This was the paradox. The law demanded purity in a place where purity, as you understand it, could not exist. But water was not the only problem. There was the question of waste. In Rome, engineers built sewers beneath the streets. Stone channels flushed by aqueduct water carried filth away from the living. The Cloaca Maxima emptied into the Tiber, and though the river ran foul, the city itself stayed navigable. Jerusalem had no such system. What it had were chamber pots, cesspits dug beneath courtyards, open gutters running down sloped streets, and the law, Deuteronomy 23:12, which commanded that human waste be carried outside the city walls and buried. The law existed because the need was constant. 100,000 people producing waste every day. Where does it go when stone walls trap heat and rain is seasonal? When cesspits overflow in winter storms? When enforcement of the law depends on individuals carrying their own refuse through crowded streets to disposal sites beyond the gates? It went into the alleys. It pooled in corners where the street dipped. It collected in the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, where the city's trash smoldered day and night, a perpetual fire fed by rotting food, animal carcasses, and yes, human excrement. The valley's name became synonymous with filth, with uncleanness, with the place where what could not be tolerated was finally burned away. But burning was not cleaning. The smell rose. It clung to the wool you wore. It mixed with the scent of animals, donkeys, sheep, goats penned in courtyards or driven through streets too narrow for them to pass without touching you. Dung dried on stone. Flies moved freely between the waste and the food sold in open markets. You would notice it immediately, not as background, as assault. Your modern nose, accustomed to soap and sanitation, would revolt. The ancient resident did not stop smelling it. They simply had no alternative against which to measure it. This was normal. This was Jerusalem. And the waste was not only in the streets. The law said, "Wash your hands before breaking bread. Immerse your body after touching death. Purify yourself after the blood of childbirth, after the discharge of disease, after contact with anything the law named unclean." Judaism did not ignore hygiene. It elevated it to sacred duty. But here was the contradiction. The law demanded what the environment could barely provide. The mikvah, the ritual bath, was not optional for the observant. It was the mechanism of return, from impurity to purity, from exclusion to community, from spiritual contamination to restored standing before God. So people came. They came after burying a parent, after menstruation, after recovering from skin disease. They descended stone steps into collected rainwater, immersed completely, emerged renewed in the eyes of the law. Dozens in a single day. The same water. You must understand what this meant. The mikveh was not drained between users. It could not be. The water was precious, and the law required natural water, rainwater, spring water, not drawn and poured by human hands. So it sat. It received body after body, skin oils, sweat, the invisible matter sloughing from every person who entered. The ritual made you clean, but the water itself became a reservoir of everything the previous bodies carried. No one knew this. There was no concept of microorganisms transferring between bathers. No understanding that the very act of purification could spread disease. The law said, immerse, so you immersed. Faith required it. Your modern mind recoils. Shared bathwater. No chlorine, no filtration, no drainage system. But their mind did not recoil. Because the purity being sought was not physical in the way you define it. It was not about killing bacteria. It was about obedience, about restoring relationship, about meeting the requirement that allowed you to enter the temple, eat the Passover lamb, stand among your people without shame. The body's cleanliness was secondary to the soul's standing, and so the paradox deepened. A religion intensely concerned with purity, practiced in conditions where physical contamination was inevitable, constant, and invisible. They washed as the law commanded, and still they carried what water alone could never remove. The washing happened in public because private space did not exist. Not as you know it. A typical Jerusalem family, 6, 7, 8 people, lived in a single stone room. 400 square feet if they were fortunate, smaller if they were not. One room for sleeping, for cooking, for storing the grain that attracted mice, for eating, praying, arguing, giving birth, tending the sick, and yes, for whatever minimal washing the day's rationed water allowed. The walls were limestone, the floor was packed earth or rough stone. A charcoal brazier burned in the center for cooking and heat, filling the space with smoke that had nowhere to go but through gaps in the roof thatch. Your eyes would water constantly, your lungs would ache, and there was no privacy for bathing, because bathing, as an act, barely existed. When water was available, when the ritual demanded it, or when the smell of your own body became unbearable even by ancient standards, you wiped yourself down in the corner, in front of your children, your parents, your siblings. The same woolen tunic went back on. Wool does not dry quickly. It holds moisture, holds sweat, holds the bacteria multiplying in its fibers. You wore it day after day because you owned perhaps 2 garments total, and washing one meant wearing the other until the washed piece dried, which in Jerusalem's humidity could take a full day. So the tunic stayed on your body. Weeks passed, the neck darkened with oil, the underarms stiffened with salt. You stopped noticing because everyone's clothes carried the same patina of use. At night, livestock sometimes came inside. A goat, a few chickens, brought in to protect them from theft, kept close because they represented wealth your family could not afford to lose. They urinated on the floor, their dung dried into the dirt. You swept it toward the door in the morning, but the ammonia smell persisted, mingling with smoke, with unwashed bodies, with the lentils boiling in a pot that had not been properly scrubbed in months. This was shelter. This was home. And you would not last 3 days. Not because you lack resilience, but because your body has been trained by a world of separated spaces. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, each with its own function, its own level of cleanliness. You have never had to sleep where you cook. You have never shared 400 square feet with 7 people and a goat. The psychological collapse would come before the physical one, the skin crawling, the desperate need to be alone, to be clean, to step into a space not saturated with the smells and sounds and proximity of other bodies. But there was no such space. There was only the room, the family, the wool tunic greasy against your skin. And beyond the door, the streets, which were worse. The marketplace was where the city's filth became food. You walked through it every day if you wanted to eat. There was no refrigeration, no packaged goods, no supply chain insulated from human hands. There was only the butcher's stall. He worked in open air. A lamb hung from an iron hook, its throat slit hours earlier. Blood pooled in the dirt beneath it. darkening the ground into a sticky paste tracked by every foot that passed. Flies landed on the exposed meat, then on the clay bowls stacked beside it, then on your hand when you reached out to inspect the cut you might purchase. The butcher's hands were not washed between animals. There was no running water at his stall, no basin for rinsing. His fingers, stained dark with old blood, handled your meat after handling the entrails he'd just pulled from another carcass and tossed into a bucket at his feet. You paid him. You carried the meat home wrapped in a cloth that had been used yesterday and would be used tomorrow. You placed it on the stone shelf in your single room, where it would sit until evening, softening in the heat, waiting to be cooked, over the same fire that smoked your eyes and blackened your lungs. And the meat was the cleanest thing in the market. The bread seller kneaded dough on a wooden board dark with use. His hands touched the flour, touched his face to wipe sweat, touched the coins handed to him by the customer before you, coins that had passed through a dozen hands that day, none of them washed. The law required hand washing before eating bread. It said nothing about the hands that made the bread. Beyond the baker, a farmer sold onions and lentils from a cart. The vegetables were grown in fields irrigated with water drawn from cisterns, cisterns that also received runoff from the streets above. The same streets where waste accumulated, where animals relieved themselves, where the overflow from cesspits drained during heavy rains. Human waste became fertilizer, not as a deliberate system, not as managed agriculture, but as the inevitable result of water scarcity and gravity. What ran downhill ended up in the soil. What grew in the soil ended up in your pot. No one knew what this meant. There was no germ theory, no microscope to reveal the organisms multiplying in the water, the soil, the blood pooling under the butcher's hook. There was only the food in front of you and the hunger in your belly. So you ate. You ate the bread kneaded by unwashed hands, the lamb butchered in open air, the lentils grown in contaminated ground. You drank water carried from a cistern that had not been cleaned in years, stored in a clay jar that had never been sterilized. And your body, trained by a lifetime of pasteurized milk, sanitized surfaces, and food handled by workers in gloves, would rebel within hours. The intestinal cramping, the fever, the diarrhea that would dehydrate you faster than Jerusalem's rationed water could replenish. You would assume you were dying. They would assume you had eaten. Because this was not food poisoning as a crisis. It was digestion as a constant negotiation. Mild dysentery was normal. Intestinal parasites were expected. Your stomach hurt because everyone's stomach hurt. The question was not whether you would get sick. The question was whether your body could outlast the sickness long enough to eat again tomorrow. And the marketplace would still be there. The flies still moving between meat and waste. The bread still kneaded by hands that had touched everything, waiting for you. There were no doctors who could save you. Not because medicine did not exist. It did. Physicians worked in Jerusalem. Healers offered remedies. The afflicted sought help. But the help had no power over what was actually killing people. Skin diseases spread through shared sleeping spaces and unwashed clothing. They were treated with oil and prayer. Intestinal parasites, worms visible in stool, causing malnutrition and anemia, were treated with bitter herbs that sometimes worked by luck, not understanding. Eye infections were constant. Flies carried bacteria from waist to faces. Hands touched contaminated surfaces, then rubbed tired eyes. Conjunctivitis became chronic. Trachoma caused blindness. The prescribed treatment was washing with wine or applying poultices of ground herbs. It did not address the source. It could not. No one knew the source existed. A cut on your hand, simple, shallow, could kill you within a week. Dirt entered the wound. Bacteria multiplied beneath the skin. The finger swelled. Red lines traveled up your arm. Fever followed. The physician might bleed you, believing bad humors needed release. He might apply a paste of olive oil and crushed leaves. He would not clean the wound with antiseptic. There was no such concept. So infection spread, and you either survived by the resilience of your own immune system, or you died in your single room, surrounded by family, who would then ritually wash your body with the same limited water, the same shared basins, and become carriers themselves. Disease was not preventable, it was inevitable, expected, woven into the fabric of daily survival. And your modern immune system, built in a world of antibiotics and vaccines and soap, would recognize none of it in time. Your teeth were rotting in your mouth, not from neglect in the way you understand it, but from inevitability. There were no toothbrushes, no paste formulated to kill the bacteria colonizing your gums, no understanding that the film coating your teeth each morning was a living ecosystem consuming enamel with every passing hour. There was only your finger. Some rubbed it with salt. Some chewed twigs frayed at the end to mimic bristles. These helped at the margins. They did not stop what was happening beneath the surface. The grain wore you down first. Barley ground on stone mills, flour containing grit, fragments of the millstone itself mixed into every loaf, bread that abraded enamel with each bite. Year after year, meal after meal. By 30, your teeth were ground flat. Cavities opened where the wear exposed softer tissue beneath. Abscesses formed in the root. The pain was constant, a throbbing that radiated through your jaw into your skull. No dentist existed to drill and fill, no analgesic strong enough to silence it. You lived with it. You chewed on the other side. You pressed cloth soaked in wine against the swelling and prayed the infection would not spread to your blood. Sometimes it did. Your body would fail first. The diarrhea would begin within 24 hours. Water from a shared cistern carrying bacteria your sanitized gut had never encountered. Within 2 days, dehydration would blur your vision. Your allocated water ration, barely sufficient when healthy, could not replace what dysentery stole from you. But your mind would break faster. Not from a single horror, from the accumulation, from the realization that there was no reprieve coming. The wool tunic plastered to your skin with sweat and filth, you could not wash it. The lice colonizing your scalp, you could not eliminate them. The stranger's body pressed against yours in the narrow street, his unwashed skin leaving residue on your arm. You could not escape him. Your modern immune system, trained in sterile hospitals and chlorinated water, possessed no framework for this density of exposure. Every surface was contaminated. Every hand that touched the bread had touched waste. Every shared cup at the well carried traces of the mouths before yours. You were not adapting. You were drowning in pathogens your biology had never been asked to fight simultaneously. The psychological breaking point would arrive when you squatted over the cesspit in full view of your family, privacy being a concept that did not exist, and understood with absolute clarity that this was not temporary, that there was no shower waiting, no soap, no escape into cleanness. Only this. Only the unrelenting, tactile reality of filth you could not wash away. They survived it. You would not. The next time you wash your hands with soap, remember Jerusalem. Remember that survival was not about strength. It was about what your body had been taught to endure from birth. Every shower, every flush, every clean glass of water. These are not luxuries. They are the invisible walls between you and the world Jesus walked. Subscribe to see what else that world demanded.